I have finally finished the rail network in my main save for Satisfactory, so I've been gradually copying all of the bridges across from that save into this separate one, so that I can create a Megaprint for an aesthetic rail network that I can share with everybody. So I'm going to use this video as a bit of a tour of the different bridges that I've done and the main rail loop that this includes. My main save has a bunch of branch lines that go into different biomes that come off of this loop, but I won't be including those in the Megaprint because people might want to do those in their own way. So this will just be a general loop of the world, and you can create your own branch lines if you need to go into places like the Red Forest, for instance. This is also a very simplified version of the loop in my main save, so I've removed things like signaling, and I've only kept a few example train stations in. I don't really expect people to use these train stations. They're more just examples of places where you might want to have them. I removed the signaling because I don't want to assume what sort of length your trains will be. I don't want to assume what side you'll have your trains running on either. I'm British, so I have them running on the left-hand side, but my guess is that most people will do that the opposite way round. So I'm just trying to keep this as flexible as I can, so to save people having to delete a load of signals everywhere. So you'll have to set that up yourself, unfortunately, but this will at least be a nice basis for people. There are lots of other rail network megaprints out there, but most of them didn't look the way that I wanted them to. I wanted something that was as stunning as the world is. So hopefully people will enjoy this, and yeah, let's give a bit of a tour. I've enabled mods for this just to make this easier so that I can fly around. So we'll start with this bridge in the grasslands. This is based on the Rialto Bridge in Venice. None of these bridges will be an exact match of the bridges that they're inspired by. Obviously there's limitations with the way we can build, but you can certainly see the inspiration in most places. The actual curve underneath it's not the most it's not the most elegant of curves, but it uses 8-meter wall pieces to start with, and then goes on to 4-meter ramp foundations, then 2-meter, then 1-meter, then some flat pieces. So from a distance, it gives more of an impression of a curve, but it still works quite nicely, I think. This is one of the few bridges in the rail loop that has a bit of an incline to it. If you've seen the Rialto Bridge in real life, it would look really weird if the base of it was flat. So for the design, I needed to have this incline come up and then go down again, but I quite liked the way the roof worked on the inside. The roof isn't the same as the actual Rialto Bridge either. I just wanted something that looked interesting. I think this does. So moving on from the Rialto Bridge and past this example train station, we end up at a bridge inspired by the Seri Wawasan Bridge in Malaysia. The actual bridge has large curved supports that come off from near the top of this main support. I couldn't quite get those to work, so I've left it without those, but I think this looks quite well anchored in its own way. The real bridge doesn't have this sort of, I guess, cinder block looking piece to anchor everything to, but it needed something in this design so that it looked a bit more anchored to the world. As you come down the bridge as well, you can see how all of these beams come off of the main support at slightly odd angles. If you want to do this in any designs yourself, the way to do it is to place a beam connector at the beginning of where you wanted to start and a beam connector at the end. You then start your beams in freeform mode, go to where your end connector is and aim at the end connector and place that beam, and then keep repeating. You always have to go to the same place where you want it to end, and that way you'll be able to create a nice long beam any angle you want over any distance. You might want to just ignore the bridge in the distance. That's based on Bridge in Shadow of the Colossus. I use that as another branch line, but won't be including that in the Megaprint. I should say, actually, as well, that this is all aligned to the world grid. So if I hold Control here to place these on the world grid, grab some of these 2-meter foundation pieces, come off of here. So you can see these align nicely. I mean, this is 1 meter higher than this one, so if I just use 1-meter pieces, that would line up. The curves obviously won't be on the world grid, but the rest of it is, with the exception of a few places where there's a sort of 2-meter offset. So the foundations for the Seri Wawasan span have a slight offset so that I could make it look a bit more supported. but the rest of this rail network is on the world grid. So once we get onto here, we come to a bridge which is inspired by the, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, the Juscelino Kubitschek Bridge, which is in Brazil. So same approach for these curves. I've just used the 8-meter wall pieces and then the ramp foundations. The actual wires on the Kubitschek Bridge go to either side of the bridge, but I kept them to the middle. I quite liked the way this looked, especially as you're coming down the bridge, how it sort of branches across to each part of the curve. So these alternate to each side and go all the way across the water here. We've then got another example train station. I use a train station here in my main save for, I use this area to create, why have I forgotten the word? I use it for a fuel power plant, and I bring compacted coal here by train. You could ignore this bridge as well. This is based on the Kaju bridge, but I also use this for a branch line where I am taking rubber across to a nuclear power plant. But I probably won't be including that in the Megaprint. As we then come towards the rocky desert, we have a slight incline. This support isn't really based on anything. I can't find very many examples in the real world of railway inclines. There just aren't that many of them, so any incline is sort of done in its own way. We then come to a bridge that is inspired by the Sunniberg Bridge in Switzerland. Again, not an exact match. I tried to make it so that these are nicely supported in parts of the world, so that these bridges feel a little bit more integrated with the world. Another example train station there, which can be used as a bit of a roundabout. There's a few roundabouts in here for when trains need to turn around, but not very many. We then come to a bridge which is inspired by the Brooklyn Bridge. Slightly awkward one to try and recreate, but I've done what I can with foundation pieces at the top there. It looked a bit odd, leaving the top just completely flat, so I've just done something here to give it a bit more depth. As we come down here, I think this looks quite nice. It's not the most faithful recreation, but you can certainly see the inspiration there. You'll also notice throughout this network that I have walkways on almost everywhere. So when you need to escape something attacking you, you can usually run inside. And then in some places there are ladders for you to get up, but for here, for instance, you can come inside. And then there are stairways so that you can get up to the top. Once we come past the Brooklyn Bridge, inspired bridge, we've got, can't remember what this was inspired by actually. It was inspired by something, but I can't remember what. I'll have to try and remember that. Same principle again for this sort of curve, using the 8-meter wall pieces and then the ramp foundations again. And should still be aligned to the world grid here. Might double check that. Yep, 1 meter difference in height there, but that looks exactly aligned. I'm using smart foundations here as well, so perfect. I'll worry about sorting that out later. Another example train station. And then we come to a bridge that is inspired by the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The supports at the ends, so the anchoring supports at the ends, aren't the same as the actual Sydney Harbour Bridge. This is just something that I felt worked. Again, you can come inside here, and there are stairways to get you to the top. Fly mode is much quicker. The curve for this was actually done again using the ramp foundation pieces, and then I was just placing beam connectors at different points and seeing what worked. This took quite a bit of trial and error, but I think it's turned out quite nicely. The walkways still come across to the other support here, which you can get inside again in a couple of different places. We then have a very big incline curve. I don't think this would ever work in real life. It doesn't look supported enough at all. Pretty sure these would just collapse. And this then gets us to another little roundabout. And then we have a bridge that is inspired by the recently completed Pingtang Bridge in China. One of the few bridge designs I could find that would work at this kind of elevation. I didn't want to interfere too much with the main supports here, or the main parts of the world, I should say, so I've just used a basic example of a wire support here to make it feel a bit more like it could actually work in real life. And then some other supports that go into the terrain. I've tried to avoid trees and things where I can. A couple of other example train stations. This bridge was also inspired by something in real life, but I can't remember which one. A rail bridge somewhere. With a really excessive amount of pillar pieces. Another curve. This bridge was based on the Karun Dam Bridge, I think. I remember seeing a picture of that and trying to match that slightly. Again, this should still be on the world grid over here, so if I hold control. There you go. The bridge here is actually based on a bridge in Battlefield 1, if you've ever played the map Rupture in that game. There's a bridge that has roughly this design, so it's inspired by that. The curve for this was a lot more awkward to build. It's using pillar pieces by placing... You place a beam connector and then place beams in diagonal mode and place pillar pieces on the end and get them to overlap smoothly. And you can get very big curves this way. I haven't done that in too many places because it uses a lot of pieces. As we come over this way, we then get to my enormous desert bridge, which is based on the Aisne-Vesle Viaduct in West Sussex in England. I thought it was quite a nice design for these supports, which I think looks much better when you're looking down the whole span of it. And this design goes all the way across the desert here. Again, walkways on the top. And still aligned to the world grid. As you can see. Another curve here, and then another double arch bridge. I can't remember what this was inspired by either, to be honest. Another example train station up here. And a small roundabout. And then this was actually the first bridge I built for this network, which was based loosely on the Millau Viaduct in France. Very loosely, though. Most of the other bridges use metal beams instead of wires. I liked the look of wires here, but it does annoy me slightly that when you're further away, the wires don't render. It looks nice when you're coming along the bridge itself. Just unfortunate that they don't render at a distance. Still, walkways that go along the entire network and connect to certain parts. This bridge wasn't really based on anything. I'm not really sure where this support idea came from. Sort of looks like a candelabra. But still, I quite like it. Another curve, and then another example train station. I do have a train station here on my main save as well, actually. Which I think I used the one here to move plastic somewhere. We then have another suspension bridge example. This is sort of a cross between the Humber Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge. Where, just like my Brooklyn Bridge design, I've used pipe pieces to create the suspension cables. Ignore that bridge in the distance. That one's based on the Pont du Gard, which I also use for a branch line, but it's not part of the main loop, so again, that probably won't be included in the Megaprint. Also won't be included to help reduce the size of the pieces down, because there's a lot of concrete pillars in that one. Another train station example of one where I have a train station in my main save as well. I think I use this one for moving some nitrogen gas around. We've then got another bridge across this gigantic span. This is where I was using that Pont du Gard inspired style, but I couldn't get it to integrate into the world as nicely as I wanted. So I've ended up doing this bridge instead, which is based on the Yachi Railway Bridge in China, at least loosely. That bridge has concrete supporting pieces, which then the steel parts go into, so that's where that design inspiration comes from. And then this loops back around towards the Rialto Bridge. I'm not entirely keen on this design here, but again, I've been struggling with inspiration for inclines on the railway track. And this bridge was actually designed by a footbridge, inspired by a footbridge in London, I believe, which I think works quite nicely. So yeah, that's the railway loop. Hope you like it.